In this tutorial, we're going to be looking at the Griffiths Valuation, or primary valuation of Ireland, to see if we can learn more about James Lowry and the Glynn family. If you haven't looked at the previous tutorials, stop now and go back. From information we've already gathered from the census, civil records and church records, we know that the Glynn family have been resident in Kilbannon from the late 1850s, and probably before that, even during the time of the famine. We know, for example, that John Glynn from Ballygaddy, Kilbannon, married Mary Diskin in Dunmore on the 7th of February 1859, and they were probably aged between 20 and 30 years old at that time. Our next logical step would be to check the Griffiths Valuation to see which members of the Glynn family, if any, are recorded. Due to the lack of 19th century census for Ireland, the Griffiths Valuation, or the General Valuation of Rateable Property in Ireland, 1848 to 64, has become one of the most important alternative sources. Undertaken by Richard Griffiths, it proposed in two periods, the first between 1830 and 1865, when the identification and valuation of buildings and land was recorded for the first time, and then during a second phase of revisions so that it could be kept up to date. The output at the end of the first period, the primary valuation, were in book format and printed by the Government Stationery Office in neatly presented columns of information. The purpose was to establish a valuation of property and identify people who could be liable for tax. It is significant, therefore, to the social and economic context in which it was created. For those listed, it is possible to identify their house, its size and quality, and determine the extent of other holdings. The valuation dates from a period in which there are relatively few other complete sources. Not everyone was listed in the primary valuation, however, nor was every head of household recorded. The valuation did not record people who lived in lodging houses or apartments within buildings. In these cases, the name of the immediate lessor was listed in the occupier column. Gardeners, herdsmen, labourers or cottiers, and a range of others are not recorded individually, as they were living in property recorded as occupied by their employer. These people, usually the most unfortunate in terms of wealth and status, do not feature at all, but sometimes they're listed in the earlier iteration and left out of the primary survey itself. Not every parish is included either. Some books and accompanying maps have been lost or are missing, but the collection is very useful and worthy of consideration. The quickest and easiest way to search the valuation is at askaboutireland.ie, a free website. There you can search by name or by place, and you can also read a little bit more about the background to the valuation itself. As we want to search for any member of the Glynn family, we're going to add that under the surname search. We know that they were living in County Galway. And as the valuation operated under the civil parish, we can add the civil parish of Kilbennan from the drop-down list and click search. The list we have here are all of the men or women, depending on the case, who are listed according to that surname in that civil parish. Here we can see that there are 5. We can't tell from this description which, if any, of these Glynn men belong to our family. So we can click in to the details search here to get an indication of what townland has been recorded. Thomas Glynn, for example, was leasing land in this townland. And because it isn't Ballygaddy, we can assume that this is not one of our Glynn family. Having clicked through all of these, the last one seems to the one that is most relevant to our search. A James Glynn has leased land from a Thomas Brown in the civil parish of Kilbennan and in the townland of Ballygaddy. If we close this form, we can then either look at the original page in various different sizes, and we can check the property on the map. The original page will tell us a little bit more about what type of holding this Glynn man leased and how much land was associated with that holding. Using the ruler scroll at the bottom, we can zoom in further. Here we see all of the occupiers of land, the name of the person they were leasing the land from, the description of their holding, and details here in relation to the valuation itself, and how much the annual valuation was in pounds, shillings and pence. What this tells us is that a James Glynn leased 2 areas, plots number 2 and 3, from a James Brown, and this included land as well as a house, out offices and a cottier's house and land. If you follow across the columns, you'll be able to see the valuation of this land. At the minute, we don't actually know how relevant this information is. As far as we are concerned, John Glynn is the direct ancestor with whom we have a relationship in Ballygaddy, not James Glynn. So we don't know, for example, if James Glynn was a brother of John or perhaps his father. This is information we're going to have to keep for later, and it might be useful as a reference point if we can learn more about the Glynn family in later series. As we look at the valuation, it is important to note the difference in the columns, where we've got numbers and letters, both normal and italic. You can learn more about what these numbers mean by visiting the Understanding the Valuation and Maps part of the Griffiths Valuation page. Details in relation to these numbers refer to the maps that are connected to the valuation itself. The numbers represent a lot number, and sometimes they can be single areas outlined on the Ordnance Survey maps. Oftentimes they are sub-labelled or sub-numbered, each of these numbers and letters meaning a different thing. Reading this section makes an understanding of the Griffiths valuation itself much easier. Once you have identified the correct townland and civil parish in the valuation, you can then go and look at the map. And the map view provides a red rectangular area within which your townland and civil parish can be located. You can scroll between the modern map, the street map, and the older historical map. As we're more familiar with the modern street map, sometimes it's easier to use this, as this is the view we're most familiar with. You can see here in the middle of the red square is Kilbannon, and it will be in this area that the lot for James Glynn will be listed. We can use the scroll in and scroll out buttons here to find the correct location. You could then toggle across to the historical map and see the plots as they would have been viewed at the time. Here we have the townland of Ballygaddy, and in plots 2 and 3, James Glynn was resident and was leasing the land. Plot 4 was leased by someone else. James Glynn occupying plots 2 and plot 3. Plot 3 in particular was quite large and extended all the way down to the river. Indeed, descendants of the family today still refer to this field as the river field. From looking at the valuation itself, we're not quite sure how relevant the connection is between James and John Glynn. The fact that there is still a house standing there today, though, and still connections to modern-day family, means that it's very likely that there is a link between these two men. Piece by piece, we're slowly adding to the story of the family. You can learn more about County Galway's local heritage by going to the website galwaycommunityheritage.org, where you can search the County Galway archive and browse through collections of local history and heritage material, including photos, documents, articles and personal stories.